So we have just launched DRI Small Project Grant Fund Round 2. This is part of some of you might recall that there was the $10 million pot of money back that was awarded in 2018, and then in 2019 that those funds were dispersed out to different were allocated to different projects. The funding for the Small Project Grant Fund was a small component of that overall $10 million. They awarded $600,000 for a Small Project Grant Fund to support additional business and building projects in the downtown or the DRI boundary. So that's where this particular round of funding is coming out of. The DRI boundary is on this slide. It, yes, looks very weird, and Auburn furniture is just right on the edge there. You just made it in there, so good for you.
Good, thanks.
We've had a couple folks that are just outside, and they are very upset about it. So, but you have to have a boundary somewhere, and this is where it landed. So any project that is looking for funding must be within this boundary. It can be a for-profit business, an entrepreneur that is in the process of opening a business, or a nonprofit. It must be locally owned. We are not going to be funding franchises or chains or anything like that. And all local, federal, and state taxes must be up to date. And as these projects move forward, one thing to pay attention to is local permitting and zoning. We're going to need to make sure that all of the work being done meets local requirements. We also, in the application process, need to make sure that you have permission to do the work that you're talking about, so that you either own the facility or you have permission from the building owner to make any improvements. So we don't want to run into a situation where there's someone thinking about moving into a building and they apply for the funding, but then down the road the landlord's like, hell no, you can't do that to my building, and then there's a whole thing. So we want to know up front that that permission is there, or that ability is there. And we really also, in the application process, want to make sure that the financing and the funding is in place, because this is a reimbursement grant. That means that the grant amount and the match amount needs to be expended up front, and then the state reimburses that after all the documentation is in. So we want to make sure that applicants are set up to be able to handle that upfront expense prior to making an award, which we will, I think, talk more about. So these are the eligible types of projects: building renovation, entrepreneurial and existing business projects. There is an allowance for special types of COVID resiliency type expenditure. So you could apply for PPE. If you want to do a takeout window, that would fall under this. You could also, typically this funding would not allow for small equipment like computers, but if you're getting a new point of sale system and need some new iPads for that point of sale system, that would be allowable under the COVID funding. So this really just, this section actually has a few things that would normally not be allowed, made allowable as long as you can make the case you're doing it for COVID resiliency and sustainability of the business moving forward. You can't buy a building or build a building with this money. Not that you could afford to with this money. So there's that. And then no site work or ancillary activities. So no retaining walls, sidewalks, parking lots, anything like that is not going to be eligible under this funding. I mean, you can read here, this is all in the guidebook as well. One thing that, with the exception of the COVID related expenditures, anything that's really easily removed from the site, any furnishings, small appliances, even like refrigerators, like normal apartment size refrigerators, stuff like that, small electronics or tools, anything that's disposable, none of that is allowed unless it fits under the COVID funding. Inventory and working capital are not allowed, except for there are certain things that are allowable under the match with working capital. That was the other thing we got them to allow us to do, is use things like rent and a few other kind of more working capital things as match, which we'll get into, and no rolling stock. You can't buy a car, a van, a food truck, anything that has a motor and wheels that you could theoretically tomorrow, after getting the grant fund, hop in it and drive to another state. As you go through the application, you are going to want to pay attention to your project description, your project timeline. These are just a few tips on how to appropriately fill those out, although, you know, Danny and our other team member, Meg, can also help with this. But the idea with a project description is to be clear as to what it is you are trying to accomplish with the funds, and detailed to the extent that someone on the committee who has never talked to you understands what your project is, but we don't need a 3-page book about it. You know, we're talking a paragraph or two to say, these are the improvements I want to make to my building, and this is why, or this is the permanent equipment that I need for my business, and this is why. You also, you know, and if it is going to be equipment, it would be good to have a list of that equipment. And again, the equipment has to be permanent machinery and equipment, something larger scale than, say, a normal household appliance or a computer, unless, again, it's the COVID related. On the project timeline, they should be realistic and, you know, actual increments of time. You know, we would like to understand when you plan to start the project, assuming everything goes as planned with the grant fund. You know, so tell us, like, I'm going to start in January and I expect to be done by May. You know, we don't necessarily just want, oh, it's going to take 6 months. We'd like to have a better sense of when the project is going to happen, assuming you get the grant funds. And make sure to leave yourself enough time. Don't tell us that you're going to finish it in 2 months when realistically that's not possible. Also in the application is this budget table. So we just want to run through this because budget tables are hard. Sources and uses tables are hard sometimes. So just to go through it in the first column, it's all the different types of things you can include in the budget. And you'll see that there are grayed out boxes. Those are ineligible expenses under whatever type of funding is listed here. Bank is like if you're going to your bank or credit union to get a loan. Owner is if you or someone in your business is going to be investing equity and cash into the project. The DRI grant is the DRI grant. That component, that component of the funding will be used on. And then the SBAP loan is actually the Small Business Assistance Program. So the city has a revolving loan fund. If you do find that you are not able to work out the financing for the reimbursement, we can look at the or the revolving loan fund to help bridge the grant funding. You know, we did have a project in the first round choose to do that, and we could look at doing that again. And basically what that would mean is you would fill out, it's the same committee, which was by design. So it's only you work with the same committee for both programs. And we just ask for additional information that would relate to that loan program. And so that is an option if you're looking for financing to bridge or do that upfront cash outlay. If you have other sources of funding, let us know. I'm sure we can finagle this table somehow, but this will generally cover what most people are using. And then when you're looking at, but you can see here that, you know, inventory isn't an eligible expense for the DRI grant. If that's going to be part of the budget as your working capital, you need to have that coming out of one of the other sources of funds. So we also have on this slide the working capital piece. So again, working capital isn't eligible as a grant expense, but you can use these specific costs that are listed here towards your match. Again, this is what they allowed us to do this because of the situation so many businesses are in right now where cash flow is tight. So we did get them to allow us to use rent, utilities, inventory, insurance, licensing, and any capitalized website development costs as part of the match component, but you cannot pay for that with the grant. the other piece of this is it has to be well documented. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but keep that in mind that you can use some of your regular monthly expenses to match these grant funds, which is nice. Any questions so far? So again, the match requirement is different for each type of project. Building renovations have a 25% equity component or match component, and building renovation grants can go up to $70,000. And for each of these, this is how the actual dollar amounts break down. So on a building renovation, if you want the full $70,000 in grant, $23,333 is what you need to also include in your budget as a match. So your total project is going to be $93,333. The math is kind of silly, but this is what it is. So for building renovation up to $70,000 with a 25% match, the key, if you're doing residential and you're planning on doing any affordable housing units, please do contact us. There's some special programming for affordable housing. So if that's something you're planning on, let us know, but I don't think anyone in this group is. Entrepreneurial seed funding is 20% match up to $50,000 in grant, and the existing business is $50,000 and 30% match. So that's how this all breaks down. Again, these grants are reimbursement based, so you need to outlay all the cash first for both the grant and the match. You need to document that, submit it to us, and then we submit it to the state, and then they reimburse us and we cut you a check. You'll find that this is how a lot of these processes work with this program. It's a lot of back and forth, a lot of paperwork, but when it comes to actually getting the funds at the end of the project, you need to provide an invoice and proof of payment. A proof of payment could be a canceled check, it could be a credit card receipt or like an online payment confirmation, no handwritten kind of janky receipts for cash payments. So cash payments are not allowed, and all the invoices and documentation of payment need to be somewhat official looking. It can't be some guy writing, yeah, you paid me $50 on a napkin. We need something more official than that. We collect all of that from you and put it together in the paperwork. The turnaround, once we have all the documentation and it's correct, the turnaround, they're saying, is up to 6 weeks on the funding. I think that's where they're thinking it is. They're saying 6 to 8 weeks, but generally it's going to be within 6 weeks. And then once we have the funding, we have to turn it around within 7 days. So it'll be a quick turnaround once it's in our bank account. So that's how the reimbursement works and the match information. In terms of your actual application, these are some notes on the scoring criteria and how the committee is looking at the projects. In addition to looking at the application for the budget, they're going to be looking for these things. They're going to be looking for the factors that were part of the original DRI priorities. So in the original $10 million application, there were priorities that were listed in that plan. And so we're going to look for those. We're going to look for the project's impact on quality of life, economic impact, and whether or not the project is really ready to move forward. We don't want to be in a situation where we've awarded someone funding and then they can't finish the project in time. Ideally, we want all these projects to be done and closed up by the end of 2022. So we just want to make sure that the timeline is reasonable and realistic. Things happen, but that's something that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking for a team that's experienced and qualified in terms of executing projects like this, and what impact that has on the community. This time around, what we are going to do is have a two-part scoring. And the first part, we're going to invite all of the applicants to come in and present on their application. So you'll have a chance to engage with the committee and talk about your project with them. But it is a competitive process and there's only so much funding to go around. So if we get too many applications, some are not going to get funded. So that's how the scoring works. Now this is just a heads up, so you know what you're getting into. This is not, you know, a quick turnaround of, okay, you were awarded and now I can start my project and get my reimbursement. There's a lot of steps that happen between the award and the time you can actually start your process or your project. And that's why, you know, as we're talking about this round, we're really looking for projects that are looking to start in perhaps the fall of this year or the spring of next year, because it's going to take that time from June to actually get through all these steps. So this is really just a heads up that this is what you're in store for. It's not meant to be a deterrent, you know, that this is very possible, it's very doable. Just be aware that this should be part of your project timeline. So the first step that we go through with awarded projects is a SHPO review. We have to collect some information about your site and your building, do an environmental assessment. If there's a residential component to your project, there needs to be some lead paint assessment. And we submit all of that. Once we collect information about your building, we submit that to SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and they make a determination about whether there are any historic components of your facility that need to be considered or preserved in your project. From there, we finalize your scope of work. So we start working on your scope of work, we submit that to SHPO, but depending on what they come back with, you might need to make a few adjustments. From there, we finalize your scope of work and execute a grant agreement. That can happen very quickly. And then we submit an environmental checklist. And so that includes the SHPO letter approving the project or with their feedback on the project. It includes the lead paint if you have a residential component. It includes an environmental assessment. It includes information about wetlands and endangered species. Most of this information we collect on our side. Once you get to this environmental review, a lot of that information is collected on our side. It's a matter of pulling maps and looking things up and just compiling it. The key input we need from you is in the SHPO process for the most part, as well as the lead paint if you have the residential component. Once we get the approval of the environmental review, you can start your bidding. While we're waiting for that environmental review, you can start putting together your bid documents. Bidding in this scenario is different than you would normally do. What has to happen is you put your bid documents together, but the bids actually have to come back to us at CETA, and then we review the bids with you. We are trying to reach an MWBE goal, so we are going to recommend and provide resources so that you can get bids from minority and women-owned businesses. And once you have all your bids back, we'll review those with you. You can select whoever you want to do the work. The key is you need to have at least 2 bids on each piece of the work. And if you do not pick the low bid, the grant will only reimburse the low bid. So you don't have to pick the low bid, but just know that whatever is above and beyond the low bid, you're paying for out of pocket. Once the bidding is done, you can start construction. We'll monitor that throughout the process, and we'll do a pre-construction visit, a mid-construction visit, and when you finish, we'll come by again. We'll take some pictures. We'll just get a sense of what's happening. Make sure there's, you're not doing anything egregious in terms of safety, worksite safety or whatever. We're not really qualified to inspect work sites, so it's pretty high level. We just want to make sure that you're doing what you said you were going to do and you aren't doing anything that could, jeopardize the project. Once that is over, we collect all your supporting documents in terms of your invoices and payments. We complete some additional paperwork and we submit for the reimbursement. And then any building renovation, you actually have to do a property maintenance declaration saying that you will own and maintain the building for 3 years. If you do happen to transfer ownership of the building within 3 years of completion of the project, there is a partial clawback. So you will have to repay part of the grant. So if you are looking to flip your building looking to do some renovations and then sell it, this is not going to be the right funding source for you because you're not going to be able to keep the money. And then if there's any residential component, you need to redo your lead paint testing and you need to do a radon test. Commercial, that is not a factor. And then finally, over that 3-year period, we're going to stop by once a year and just make sure that things are as they should be. So basically, this time from approval or award of the grant to actually starting construction, you can imagine this takes a couple of months. This takes some time because there's all sorts of paperwork and there's all sorts of people reviewing different things. So it takes a couple of months to get through this process. And again, we just want you to be prepared for that in your timeline. Any questions on this? Because it's a lot. Okay, so the next steps are that the review deadline is May 21st. So if you want to ensure that someone on our staff is able to review your application, get you feedback in time to submit the application by the deadline, we need to have it by the 21st. Anyone that comes in between the 21st and the 4th, we'll try to get you feedback, but we can't guarantee it at that point, depending on how many applications there are. The application deadline is June 4th. You are not required to submit your application for review, but that is a good way to make sure that you're hitting scoring criteria and make sure your application is complete prior to the actual submission deadline. And then we're scheduling a meeting or a couple of meetings with the scoring committee in mid-June. That's when we'll invite you back to talk to the committee about your project. The 2 people in our office who are spearheading and helping our applicants are Danny, who is working on building renovations, and Meg, who is working with the existing business and entrepreneur. So by all means, communicate with them as you're working through your application. They're here to help. And our goal is to have as many great applications as possible. So by all means, utilize our help if you need it. And that is the end of it. So I'll open up to questions if anyone has questions. Chris, did your question kind of get answered in that process?
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of left feeling that maybe I don't qualify.
So anything that you've already started or anything you've already spent money on isn't going to qualify. If perhaps the gym, if you haven't started that piece yet, could qualify.
Okay.
Or if there's another project coming up and you can rob Peter to pay Paul by paying for another project and freeing up the cash for the roof.
Right.
We're open to that too.
Okay, sure.
But the roof you already started is probably not going to be a strong application.
Okay. Helpful.
Can applicants get funding in 2 different categories, Tracy? So like a building renovation as well as an existing building?
So typically we're going to put you into one category. So like one example is in the first round, there was a business that owns the building and they're going to be renovating the building, but also getting some equipment for their business. We put them into the building renovation fund and they just included the equipment in that. So you can't necessarily say I'm going to apply for 70 and 50 as the same applicant, but you can, but we can mix and match a little bit.
Okay, all right.
Within each category.
And 600,000 is the total funds available for across.
It was originally the total funds available. It is no longer. Some of it has been allocated. I think we're at about 230 that are left. Does that sound right, Taylor and Danny? So, we could, depending on what the asks come back at, we could probably fund, between 3 and 6 projects.
Great.
What else? And again, we're here. If you come up with questions later as you're mulling it over, by all means, reach out. And I did record this, so if you want to go back and look at it again to just, think it over a little bit more, we can make the recording available. And if anyone wants the slides, I can do that too, but. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. And this is record timing, so unless there's any other questions, you're free to go. Bye, Chris. Oh.
So Tracy, you're going to send the link to the recording then, or?
Yep, we can send the link out.
Okay, great.
And you'll also send the docs you shared, the PDFs of the info.
Yeah, well, I can send the
PowerPoint.
presentation
Yeah.
and all the other PDFs, like the application stuff, we'll send the link to where that is, but I think you probably all already have it, but we'll send it as a reminder where the application and the program overview and all that.
For the project we're working on, since it's kind of, I mean, it's part of it. We haven't spent any money on it. Well, any money we've spent, we wouldn't submit. Like, we had to determine that there was asbestos, but that was covered by, previous DRI. Are we still eligible for these extra unknown expenses that came upon us within the project if we haven't spent any money on it yet?
Yeah, I think as long as it's not overlapping with other funding, you would certainly be eligible. What I will say is if it's a competitive round, the fact that there's already other funding in the project will probably be considered. Okay. And, projects that don't have other funding sources, may rise a little bit. Yeah. But hard to tell how many we're going to have. So.
Sure. And you're giving out all 600?
So there's 30,000 set aside for administration and costs that we incur, but there's still 230 that's accounted for in the calculation.
230?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. Good. Well, thank you.
Great.
Thank you for sharing all the info.
Thank you.
It's helpful.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to talk it through,
Tracy, a question if I could.
Yeah.
There was some testing that had to be done, environmental. Who covers the cost of that?
So for the assessment, what we're doing is we're covering the cost and getting it reimbursed as part of our admin. For the environmental checklist, if you have a residential component, which I don't think is the case for any of you, but if there's a residential component, the lead paint, we're asking the building owner to take care of, because not all the projects need that.
That's only for residential.
Yep. Yeah, but the base assessment for hazardous materials, we decided it was easier for us to just hire a consultant to do that for everyone, as opposed to wrangling everybody to get their own. So we cover that cost.
Okay. We don't not have to pay that. Good.
Yeah. And that assessment, it isn't a lot. Basically the way it's working out this time is the consultant came into town, she walked around the property, she took some pictures. I don't think she went inside any of the buildings. So it's not a very invasive investigation. It's just looking at the history of the site, if there could be any hazardous materials, and then, just kind of an external inspection.
Right. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
All right. I'm going to pop off. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.